Okay, so I'll go ahead and officially start today's event, and I'm not going to say too much for today. So thankfully, Alicia is going to be moderating, so I will turn it over to you to make introductions and get us started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lesia Vicente. I am the founder of the Global Law Observatory for Business and a law professor. I am honored to be your moderator today for this discussion on the social compact between businesses, government, and society. Before we begin, I would like to thank our panelists for taking the time to share their expertise with us today. I would also like to acknowledge the outstanding organization and effort of the Center for Business Law at the University of British Columbia to bring this event to fruition. We are delighted to collaborate with the center and are thankful for this opportunity. This event is part of a framework that brings together academia and businesses to explore pressing issues that lie at the intersection of governance, business, and society. Is the social compact between citizens, businesses, and governments out of balance? If so, should it be redefined or reimagined? Today, we will address these questions, why they matter, and what steps we might take to leverage collective innovation and expertise. Our goal is to foster a thoughtful, productive dialogue that leaves you with inspiration and new perspectives for the future. Today's session is part webinar, part fireside chat online. We have a distinguished panel who will provide their perspective on how businesses, governments, and civil society can work together in a way that benefits everyone. I will guide the conversation by posing a series of questions and a few housekeeping notes. Please ensure your phones are turned off or in silent mode so we can minimize disruptions. We will open up the discussion to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions during the panel, please note them down for the Q&A session, which will start immediately after the discussion. Now, let me introduce our distinguished panelists, our esteemed panelists this afternoon or evening, depending on the time zone you are. Alan Palmater, William T. Wilson, third presidential chair for business law and professor of law at Wake Forest University School of Law. Patricia Ipma, founder and managing director of Spark Legal and Policy Consulting. Sergeant Jason Fry, founder and CEO of Terrapin. Nuno Frota, chief legal and compliance officer of Lubito Atlantic Railway. And Nabil Kabirpour, lecturer and director of studies at the University of Cambridge Faculty of Law. Each of our panelists has a unique perspective on the fluid relationship between businesses, government, and society. The audience can explore their full bios through the provided links, in particular those who are watching online. So thank you all for being with us. I am so excited to have this extraordinary group today. Let's dive into our discussion with the first question. What does the term social compact mean to you? And I would like to address, let's start with Alan. Alan, hello, thank you for coming.
I was afraid you'd call on me first. So when you invited me to this roundtable, invited everybody else to the roundtable, there were a few first impressions. It's terrific to be with folks who, as you point out, will bring such different perspectives. Second, what is a roundtable? For me, it's kind of like a dinner party, right? We're, gathered and we're supposed to be scintillating and well-mannered. And the third impression that I had was I don't think the social compact is maybe the best way to get at, Lesia, what you have in mind. And so here we are. We're supposed to be talking about the social compact, and I question whether that's the right framing of the conversation, because the social compact, as typically understood, is an old white man's European perspective of the world, justifying the existing power structure. Hobbes, Locke, even Rousseau, they're all trying to explain why it is that the state of political affairs in Europe and in Britain are justifiable. If we were to take an indigenous perspective on this, David Graeber's book, The Dawn of Everything, would say we're pursuing something that may not be fulfilling, may not satisfy human fulfillment. And so I say, maybe you intended that I suggest that rather than talk only about this relationship of government, business, and society, we should include at the table broadly society, but also nature. And perhaps we live too much in the secular, the sacred. So I'll make way at our dinner table party for somebody who would be a spokespeaker for nature and a spokespeaker for the sacred, in addition to talking about government, business, and society.
Thank you, Ellen. That takes me to a question that I had that is related to what's wrong with the social compact. And I think you've just approached it from the nature point of view, and some of the issues that we're dealing right now have to do with whether there is climate change, whether the evolving environmental conditions we're living in are affecting the way we look at our governments, at businesses, and how we position ourselves in society in order to tackle those challenges. I had the opportunity to talk to Patricia some time ago about some of these issues. Patricia, what do you think about what Ellen said when it comes to looking at nature as also an element that sometimes is forgotten but should be more present in our conversation when it comes to the connection between citizens and their governments, and the role that businesses play in society beyond making profit, of course. What do you think?
Yeah, I find it really interesting just to go back to Professor Palmer on the social contract, because I actually went straight away, my brain went to Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. And I find their, outdated maybe philosophies very much applicable to today. Hobbes said, human life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And if left unruled, humans live in fear for each other, and the sovereign has to protect humans. And I think that protection element is still really relevant. And I think that also has a link to nature. We are part of nature. I think we are very much, we need nature. We need, there's so much research that points out humans thrive in nature, and we need it. And we're not protecting it as much as we should maybe. But I think it's really interesting to go and talk about these old philosophical subjects because they very much link to what is happening now. Also, you know, Hobbes was really much looking at like, oh, you know, we're this wild species and we need to be protected from each other. But then Rousseau really was able to bring that further and say, look, the state is actually a moral person, and whose life is the union of its members. Laws are acts of the general will. Objective is liberty and equality of the citizens. So, you know, that's still very relevant, isn't it? So that I just wanted to put that in response to Professor Palmater's statement.
No. You work with the Lobito Railway Company, and when we talk about nature and in coming from Angola, and from an African approach, how do you see things playing out from this more philosophical perspective? Do you think it matters and in practice? And how much thought do you put into the decisions or the counseling that you make whenever you're trying to help this huge investment that you have made right now? So how does nature play out? Considering that it's one of the resources, nature is a major resource for the success of your enterprise.
Yes, thank you, Lesia. You know, the project, the Lobito Atlantic project, is obviously conscious of the impact it has in nature in general. And by nature, all the surroundings. But when you look at the impact we have by not only generating jobs, but all the thought that has been put into this consortium, and the real impact it has, not only in Angola, where it is primarily located, but also across the border in Congo. You clearly understand that we are looking at our context, not only the environment, environmental context, but also people that are positively affected by such a project. I am not certain that most of the people that see this project coming to fruition will be interested or knowledgeable enough in terms of the impact that environment around us has nowadays in all our decisions. Of course, we are. And so there's another side to that, which is our obligations towards the people this project will impact. And I prefer at this point to look at what are the consequences of what we can bring to the table in terms of how the project may positively affect people in the environment, rather than segregate issues that most of the people positively affected, as I mentioned, would know about.
Can you just, for the sake of clarity, tell us a little bit more about the Lobito Atlantic Railway? How much money is involved in this enterprise, so that we can all understand the importance and the dimension of this business and how impactful it can be on society, on people's lives, and also the type of connection that it can have not only with the Angolan government, but with many other governments, the US government, the surrounding countries, European countries. So it's a true global business. Can you please tell us a little bit more about the story?
Indeed, Lesia. So just to to give a context, so the Lobito Atlantic Railway is the operational company of a consortium made up with 3 international players, one Swiss-based, an international major trader who has assets and deals with assets located in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The other shareholder is a major construction company heavily involved in Africa and Latin America. And the other one is a Belgian player that is reputable in the business of running railways across Africa. So these 3 companies came together and won a tender in Angola to turn the railway that goes all the way from Lobito in the province of Benguela in the Atlantic all the way to Dolilo in the border of DRC. The reason why this project has made the news and is so important is because of the length, firstly, over 1,300 kilometers of rail being refurbished. So as you mentioned, heavy investments over a period of time. This is a 30 years concession, state concession. And these 1,300 kilometers across the country to a neighboring country will heavily impact on all the population that will directly benefit from this corridor. It is the fastest way to the Atlantic in Africa, and so in this part of Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, and therefore any type of commodities, foodstuff or hard commodities, will circulate by rail much faster, and therefore will be of benefit to all the populations in this corridor. And so as you understand, this is effectively a joint venture, an obligation from the consortium to take this project to fruition. It's an obligation in terms of the concession that we have signed, but it is also an obligation towards the people who expect this to benefit their lives on a daily basis. I wouldn't really talk about the amounts. It is known, it is public information that we have an engagement with the United States of America for the financing of this project. This is a big commitment, but it's also a big project and also known as one of the major infrastructure projects across Africa. So a lot of responsibility for the project, but from where I stand and in my position as chief legal of the operational company, it is for sure the impact that this will have with the success that we every day we work for.
Thank you, Nuno. Jason, let me turn to you. And I do remember talking to you about the social compact. Ellen brought in the idea of nature and our connection to it. And I would interpret it as a way to broaden our definition of what social compact is. Perhaps it's not even the best definition to define the link there is between citizens, governments, or the type of expectations that citizens have when they're dealing with their government. So what is it for you, coming from someone who has done public service at the highest level and who is committed to bring the government to their citizens? What is the social compact for you, and is there something wrong with it?
Absolutely, Lesia, thank you so much. It's good to see some old friends and new ones. And to the students in the class, thank you for your time and your dedication. This is really important. I look at, learning or, working in the policy space as sort of like doing crunches and eating well. Nobody sees your sacrifice until the benefits. So thank you for taking the time and the effort. I also appreciate the diversity, Alicia, that you've put together here of opinions. And I'm here in Washington, D.C. right now. There's only a few things going on. I don't know if you've been watching the TV, but there's seems to be things at all corners of the globe, something interesting occurring. I would look at, just to simply answer your question, Lesia, I would look at a social compact sort of an evolution or an evolving relationship between individuals, the businesses or the corporations that they create, either legally or informally, the governments that they allow to be in power, right? These governments are not our rulers. They are here by the, there's a great line by my favorite founding father, Alexander Hamilton, who said, "Here, sir, the people govern." We are, I'm a congressional staffer by trade in past life. I was a Marine before that. I believe in service, and I believe that government is there to serve its citizens and not the other way around. So it's the government piece and then society as a whole. And I would wholly associate myself with both Patricia and Alan's remarks about nature and the sacred, specifically the sacred. I think in terms of like, how an individual sort of maybe not necessarily in a religious connotation, but how an individual, goes through an ever expanding universe, flying at a few thousand miles an hour, spinning around a big ball of fire. We each have our own intrinsic value as a human. And I really appreciate that Alan mentioned Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau in the sense of, in my understanding of the social compact, or what we should get up in the morning and expect, is the consent. We provide our consent to the governed. That's through elections, that's through constitutions, rule of law, trust, mutual shared purpose, right? Whatever, mutual beliefs, whatever it might be. But we should have an understanding of what it is that we're going to wake up to. And it starts with choice. And then the rights that Locke laid out, that those are life, liberty, and property, right? That every single human is endowed by a creator, not a government, but by a creator. The Enlightenment and the Western world of today is the magnet to humanity. Nobody is fleeing the West to go to Saudi Arabia because they don't share those values. And so, not to criticize Saudi Arabia, but the point is that if you look at outflows and inflows of migration, it's going one way over the other. But I had dinner with a PhD friend, and some people on this may appreciate this. I had a dinner with with a client actually last night, and I mentioned our talk and what we were going to talk about, and he heard the term social compact. He's a macroeconomist, and he heard the term social compact, and he laughed and he said, "I don't like that, that phraseology. I think you could use a different term." So I completely understand, Alan, your point, but I actually really love it because at the end of the day, all we are is a bunch of humans walking around on a planet, trying not to kill each other, and having a government maybe be helpful in that or not be so helpful in that. And we are trying to self-actualize, especially on the West side, the West, we're trying to self-actualize. And that's really dangerous, as we're finding, just as not self-actualizing is dangerous. One of the things that I say in Washington all the time is that it all depends on whose ox is getting bored. And because we're talking with some people from Canada, I think that's a great explanation, and then I'll wrap it up here. But is, reciprocal tariffs. That's a major issue, right? A huge point of contention across the globe right now. And I know that there's a lot of people on the northern part of our border that are very upset about reciprocal tariffs. And I think that, when, to my point about whose ox is getting bored, is, hey, Americans don't like it because we're paying tariffs. We're paying 300% tariffs on dairy. We're paying, massive tariffs on lumber and things, data exchanges and services. We're paying enormous tariffs already. And then we're subsidizing NATO and things like that, right? This is the big fight, right, that everybody's having in the United States right now. And so our ox is getting gored on that side, right? But conversely, right, The Canadians are saying, hey, we're partnering with you, the United States or the West, instead of partnering with someone else. Right? We're sending things to you instead of sending something to somewhere else. And so we have come to have a reasonable expectation that this is the terms of the agreement. Right. And so the point is that I think that it all comes down to whose ox is getting gored when it comes down to government policy at the end of the day. Politics makes strange bedfellows. And that's why I think people are able to sort of look past differences sometimes because, hey, my enemy of, my enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think that's a really, a very human-centric way of looking at, maybe even an emotional way of looking at how people look at policy. And you can get sort of grievances or concerns or frustrations about the efficacy of a policy, or should a policy last, or should governments continue to engage. And I think that it's really, really important for us all to remember those. We're talking about the social compact, is that again, it was those foundational, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau that had those, the primacy of and the legitimacy of a central state by consenting people that are governed, and that those people have the rights that are not endowed by a government, but by something else. And that as Western countries are eroding those things, you're seeing problems. I think there's some issues where it could be out of balance. There's other regions around the world that are showing us different examples that in many ways are better than what we have here. So we have to have an open mind, but I think at the same time, we have to keep in context what the compact really is, which is, again, consenting individuals, allowing a government to govern them, and how that society at large evolves and changes as other things change.
All right, so we have here, I would say, different visions of the type of connection there is between citizens and their governments. Jason seems to be very in favor of this idea of social compact. I would say that Ellen thinks that perhaps we could bring in other elements to define it in a way that perhaps is a little bit clearer. Nabil, how do you look at this idea that citizens have rights that are afforded to them beyond the government? So the government should be an institution or an entity that makes sure or ensures that these rights that citizens have, access to justice, access to rights that are constitutionally defined. So the government should ensure that the citizens can exercise their rights. But what is the basis? Where are these rights coming from? So if it is not the social compact or a contract, some would refer to it as such, between citizens and government, what is it then?
Yep, thanks very much, and also very interesting to hear all the contributions so far. So the perspective I'll take is, given I'm based in the UK, I might speak a little bit about the European human rights law framework, but I think some of these points apply equally in North America, and particularly the United States. So a law lord in the UK once said that a human rights claim is a claim against your own community. And what he meant is that the quality of a human right shows its power in situations where, through, say, an ordinary legislative process, the sort of mere civil state of rights is in such a position that it requires protection from a higher legal order. In Europe, we have the European Convention on Human Rights that sets out these guarantees. And from time to time, there is a tension between what governments might like to do and what these rights protect. To your question of where they actually come from, now, of course, in Europe, that has a very long and checkered history. And I would maybe pick up on this point made briefly about some of the post-Enlightenment thought, because I think up until the Enlightenment in Europe, and perhaps further afield, it was very clear that the source of rights came from the Lord on high. So there was some version of divine revelation And the same was true for marriage laws, and the same was true for pretty much any question of right and wrong in society. However, in the wake of the Enlightenment and the rise of the nation state, what you began to have was you began to now have a system in member states or within national governments that decided what is right and wrong, and it untethered itself from religious truth. Of course, a lot of the values took their shape from what had come before, but with the rise of secularism as well, you now have a situation where rights have a preeminent status, but of course many would say that they don't anchor themselves in religion as they used to. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is of course open to debate. And maybe finally, just to mention, I think it does come back to perhaps the theme that sort of infuses this entire discussion. It's about relationships, and sort of the right ordering of relationships, which is also what a human rights claim is about. And at the same time, even though in theory or the law is on the books and it exists, there's also the question, as you alluded to, of making those rights real through access to justice. And that's a whole separate conversation, because you need a remedial system that is functional, that is free from corruption, that is free from bias, that is free from all sorts of things. And then you need individual right holders that know about their rights, because the majority of the time they don't. In Europe, over 70% don't have adequate access to justice, and I would have thought that the numbers are similar. So there's a lot of work, and maybe there's even more work to do in providing sound avenues for structural and individual access to justice than it is in conceiving sort of the finer points of human rights law.
So my question to all is, it seems that there is work to do, a lot of work to do, in particular because individuals may not be completely aware of the scope of their rights, which may impart the way they relate to their governments, or they make choices. I think Jason was referring to making choices. So what do we do, right? So we've been dealing with extreme weather events, significant economic disparities and poverty, problems related to access to justice in the court system, labor precarity, aging populations, gender imbalances, illiteracy, and migration. These are problems that affect not only the West, but also countries around the globe. What do we do? What is the role of businesses in this context, considering that businesses are more present than ever when it comes to policymaking? And also, there have been studies that show that businesses have the capacity to anticipate trends, economic trends, political trends, and so on, and they make decisions in line with those trends ahead of governments. It's a question of survival of the business. So they are important. What's their role? What should be done? What do you think could be done? Patricia.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think business is a really important stakeholder in society. You know, we, as you say, we help innovate, we invest, we contribute to growth, we develop skills, I guess, in the labor market. There's a lot of impact that we have as a business, and we can have a positive impact, but we're not chosen by the democracy. And I think actually that's something that I find a huge issue at the moment. I know you're asking me what's the solution, but maybe we can take one little step back because we have, even though we have the rule of law, we have democracy in Europe, and we can debate, and in the US it's becoming a bit of a problem, but we can debate the, you know, the state of it and the efficiency, effectiveness of it. But we can also see that some big businesses have completely taken over our lives. They have a lot of power. I mean, I talk to parents, I talk to, you know, all our children are addicted to social media, and it completely polarizes us as a society. So I think we have to be very careful in making businesses too important and giving it a big role in society in terms of, yeah, a powerful role. So that's one thing I wanted to say, because that's one thing that is a huge concern for, in my view, for our society at the moment. But I think we can, yeah, we can have a positive impact. It's not our obligation. It's not, you know, we have a role as a stakeholder, and I think we can do a lot, and we can be very powerful. And you know, some of the issues that you're mentioning, you know, we speak up as business leaders on gender equality, on you know, when there's adverse weather events, obviously businesses step up, you know. There's money maybe that governments don't have. So yeah, we have a role, and we can do a lot.
Jason, what's your view on this, on the role of businesses when it comes to tackling many of these challenges that I've just mentioned? Patricia was just saying that it's not businesses' obligation to intervene, but what we've seen is a very close connection between businesses and governments in many parts of the world. What do you say?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with Patricia more. I can tend to get crosswise with some of my free market friends on this opinion. But I think that we saw this really after the financial crisis of 2008 that was essentially caused almost exclusively by business and pressuring governments to have lax oversight and to say, hey, it should be the dream of every American to own a home, and sure, or that, you know, in any other country that had exposure to the mortgage crisis of the 2008s. Social activism from a corporate perspective has really increased ever since then. And I think what it does is it creates distortionary effects. And because at the end of the day, those companies have a profit motive or a profit incentive. And so they can say, you know, they'll say, oh, well, we're going to make our company, again, something very laudable, like maybe more diverse or more carbon neutral. But what you may actually see is they might actually cut corners. And so they might reduce pay, right, and treat their workers worse, which is leading to an income gap, right? They might, you see this with the sharing economy companies in the United States a lot, is they'll agree, oh, okay, well, we'll pay health insurance benefits for all of our drivers, or for the people that work for us, you know, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the DoorDashes. We'll increase our output for all of our drivers, right? But then they make the threshold extremely high, because, you know, because healthcare is important to us as a company. But then they make the threshold so incredibly high that 88% of sharing economy employees or contractors, as it were, don't have health insurance. They don't have retirement plans. They don't have any form of insurance, right? And most of them often are paying out of pocket for their own insurance to drive for Uber and Lyft on top of those things. So what it actually does is that it creates a distortionary effect that the corporation sort of gets to have its cake and eat it too, which is the whole point of business. And I think that, but, you know, and this is one of the things I do. I help businesses engage government. This is 101, what I help companies do. I will not work with companies that are trying to hurt people, that are going to try to do something a little bit untoward that I think that is going to create harm on another person. We won't work with them. And now, again, we don't run into too many of them, but across the whole, it creates a distortionary effect. And I think that business has become too important in a lot of decisions that we have made. Like in the United States, for example, one of the last remaining justifications, and again, I'm not taking a position on this, but on the Ukraine war, on funding that was, well, we're giving the money to our US defense contractors and their stock price will go up and that'll help our economy. And come on, privatized prisons is another good one, right? Like, oh, well, you know, we have publicly traded prisons and our prison population, you know, 10x's, right? So it can create distortionary effects that skew the policy space. So I think that business needs to be regulated and controlled, and how much control it can have. Absolutely.
Alan,
So,
how,
Leslie, let me comment, because
yes.
on a great dinner party conversation going. And if we return to the theme of social compact, social contract, we start with this idea of mutual trust. For, you know, how can we have a compact, a contract without mutual trust? And so trust is something that I've thought about, and others have been thinking a lot about this. I think that we've lost a lot of trust around the globe, small and large. But for me, trust is this confidence that somebody has my interests at heart, and that person also can navigate uncertainty. That's why trust. And if you step away and begin to ask the question about, do we trust government? No. Do we trust business? No. Do we trust religion? Some, yes, but by and large, no. So who do we trust? This generation says, I trust my parents. This generation has a greater longing to be protected by their parents. But I think at the heart of your question about the social compact is restoring trust in institutions. And I think that that comes down to government and business recognizing what it is that has been missing. And a lot has been missing. For example, is the US government a democracy? Is it legitimate? My answer is no. A democracy means the public will is expressed in what the government does. You can begin listing things that most Americans want, and they won't happen. A tax on billionaires, no chance. Medicare for all, no chance. Some kind of response to the climate crisis, no real chance. And you keep on going down the list. Drug programs for people in need, almost no chance. And so what about business? And I think Jason's right. The profit incentive means that business, by and large, is there to make money, to greenwash. Right now, that seems to be the principal way of responding to calls for ESG, though there might be some actual honest response. And if you step away from what MBA schools teach, and I think what lies at the heart of business, I make money by hurting people, by externalizing cost. Jason, I find it hopeful that there's some businesses who didn't go to those MBA classes. But I asked my MBA colleagues, what else are you teaching? And they, yeah, that's what we do. So we've got a social compact with government, business, and society, and I don't know who represents society, and there's nobody to trust.
No. Do you think the West is out of balance? Because I think Jason referred to the Western world. I think his approach was focused a little bit on the Western world. I want to open it up and tie this conversation to the title of our chat. Is the Western world out of balance, or do you see Africa and other continents and countries trying to juggle some of these challenges as well, or is this an unfair question?
No, I don't think it's an unfair question. I don't believe in unfair questions. I think Africa and Africans are more and more pragmatic about their relationships, not only at the diplomatic level, but business, finance, every side you can name. For many years, the narrative was controlled. It's no longer controlled because as people grow older and are educated in the same international schools, from Cambridge to any of the best universities in the US or in Portugal, being the Angolan context historically linked to Portugal. I think what is happening is there's a conscious that in the sub-Saharan African region, there's a story to tell, and there's a focus on what is the African continent to Africans. Why do we need to go elsewhere when everything is pretty much coming from here? And I'm just going to give you an example that we probably all know, but the major mines from where comes the materials for the batteries of the EVs are in Congo. Then they're not elsewhere, the major ones. So effectively, if we can take advantage of that, we can actually write our own story in the next chapters. And I think this is where we're looking, what we're looking at in terms of balance. That is the balanced relationship. It is no longer a cry for help, but we are open for business. So it's the other way around, I think. Also, when we look at, and obviously I'm going to talk about my particular context, but when we look at this region, and Angola in particular, you're talking about a country that is roughly 5 times the size of the UK, but it has, I guess, 39 million people. So I wouldn't say half, but almost half. The UK should be around 70 million nowadays. So when you look at what the real potential is, you realize that actually there's space for everyone. And why this is important, because unfortunately, in such a sizable geography, you really need companies, because the state will not be able to cope, even if it's a natural resources rich country such as Angola, who has all the things that the world for many years needed, petroleum and so on. So effectively, we need companies, and we need companies with obviously an awareness of what needs to be done, as I said, and I insist on the people's needs, because I think without that, then you don't know what this continent is about, because it's a continent that puts people first. Obviously not withdrawing myself from my conscious of the problems that exist. But then if the companies can put on the table best practices and good governance and influence positively everything around, maybe these companies and that money that serves the purposes of these companies can also make a difference. That's what I think.
Thank you so much for that answer. But I want to bring in other factors since we are all interconnected. We've just gotten a question that I will share once we open the Q&A. But what about the political instability and what some perceive as a technological delay in Europe? What about the political transitions that we're seeing in the United States and Canada? The emergence of AI and new technologies, geopolitical strategies that are in place, particularly to mitigate some impact of globalization. And questions related to the funding of government spending. So yes, society is important. Yes, businesses are attuned to that, to the needs of citizens and members, society members. But what about these elements? How do you perceive them? Do you think that these elements are going to affect some of the strategies, business strategies, or how we position ourselves when we look at businesses and governments and how they relate? How do you feel about this? Nabil, let's start with you.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I think you cut off on the end for me there. Can you just repeat the last sentence?
Yes. So how do you look at all these elements besides the perspective, the business perspective that Nuno was talking about? He was talking about the business perspective within an African context. But now I want to broaden up the discussion and bring in other factors or ideas that we need to consider, things we need to consider in the context, so to speak, the global context that includes political instability in Europe and what some refer to as a delay, a technological delay in Europe that may affect the way governments will respond to the needs of their population and geopolitical strategies, for example. Or we can also think about the political transitions that are occurring in the United States and Canada that will certainly impact the way governments connect or link, make their relations, build their relations with businesses, or the emergence of AI and new technologies, geopolitical strategies, the funding of governments. So do you think that these elements will impact how we see businesses' potential to positively impact the society by the way they link or the way they relate to governments?
Okay, yeah, there's that's fertile ground, a lot of food for thought. Maybe just picking up one or two strands. I think one thing that's been very interesting with the new administration in the United States, which I'm sure mirrors some dynamics that exist in other places in the world, is actually this question of values. And I think for a long time we've seen a period where sort of values were foisted upon businesses, charities, indeed government as well. And although one can have a discussion about, of course, sort of what's taking place, I don't want to make this too sort of party political, but I think it has generated a conversation and a very useful conversation about some of the values that underlie, for instance, the importance of diversity, but in such a way that it's understood and it's not a sort of tyranny of values that is from top down, but that actually comes from the ground up. Now, I'm obviously less sort of well placed maybe to speak on the North American experience. But one of the things that we see in the United Kingdom and I'm sure this is mirrored in Europe as well, but I think the UK is a very interesting example of this, and particularly sort of the space around Greater London is actually the incredible sort of link up between businesses as well as foundations, NGOs, and those in the sort of third space. And I think what is increasingly sort of being removed is this very sharp divide also between, are you sort of private practice bad ones? Are you fighting the good fight for the people? But I actually think that there's a lot more collaborations, and I can give an example of this. I mean, it's very specific, but in addition to the work at the university, I run a pro bono and public interest initiative where we do casework for those that could otherwise not afford legal advice. And what we do differently is that we operate like a law firm, except the clients don't pay. So we source our funding differently. And in this regard, I've actually found that, yes, there are, of course, governmental sort of funds for this, but I've actually found much more support from the private sector, sort of both the legal space, but indeed also foundations that are attached to, for instance, private equity funds. And I think moving past this demonization that can sometimes be in the narrative is really, really important. And also, I think this point about CSR came up. Somehow CSR can also get a bad name, and sort of this idea of corporate social responsibility that becomes a bit of a buzzword. But at the end of the day, and this is something I've learned through this initiative, if it's doing good work and if people are helped that otherwise wouldn't be helped, and it's allowing those that have an idea to try and scale it and to bring up, then actually what you want to call it and whether it's buzzword or not is completely secondary. So those are just some thoughts along some of these themes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I would like to open the Q&A. I will share one question that we got. Can't we agree that the world of businesses is an heterogeneous set, with most businesses prospering by creating value, which is another way to say by caring about human needs, and some numbers of businesses specializing in capturing others' resources? So this was the question that we got. I will copy it on the chat so that you can see it. And I wonder who would like to answer this.
I read it in the Q&A. I have been thinking about it for a second, if I may. This question is creating value serving or fulfilling human needs? And I think of a major port with all of the containers lined up, stacked up. And I think to myself, is that fulfilling human needs? It is creating value at a business level. It wouldn't exist otherwise. But I sense that we may be in the process of questioning what human needs are. And a lot of them are driven by what business tells us our human needs are. Just like the Instagram feed tells us what to think about the world and the political situation, and then to reinforce whatever we ended up clicking on. But, you know, when I was younger, maybe it made sense to have lots of needs. As I get older, I feel less a compulsion. I ask my students, how many suits do you have? What do you think younger people would say? What do you think you would say? How many suits do you need? Do you need any? And so this question of needs and human fulfillment is the one that I would think we should address.
Patricia, what would you say?
Yeah, I was gonna unmute. Yeah, I mean, first of all, Nabil, I so agree with what you said. We also see this in Europe a lot. We do projects for the European Commission and do a lot of stakeholder involvement as well. So we talk a lot, we interview businesses, and we try to get citizens' views. And the EU, you might not see it as much, and there's much work to do, but it's, you know, it's trying to really get the views in from and get people together and talk about issues. About businesses. Yeah, I think Professor Palmater, I do agree with, you know, what do we need in terms of material side of things. But I think as a business, we can indeed add value. You know, we add value by creating jobs. And also, if you do it well, your business is kind of a small democracy. You know, it's, of course, I'm the business owner. I put money in it. I invest in it. So, you know, it's not like a government, but still I run my business where I let them develop their strengths, develop their challenges, or grow, maybe even think about. We come together, like Nabil also does with the Law Corner. We come together, we talk about issues, and they all relate to our work. We work in EU policy, but I think we definitely, in that sense, as a business, can create positive value. Again, this is not our obligation or role in society, but we definitely can add positive value.
No.
I think the positive value needs to be there. And I think in this particular project, for Lobito, for the Lobito Atlantic, for the OPCO, the operational company, we've got you know, we've got almost 1,000 employees. We were born in 2022. We know that families rely on us. So if the question is, should our company create value? We don't have a choice. This is a commitment. This is a real commitment. So I do understand that it might not be everywhere around the globe the same. I appreciate that. And so that people know, I lived in the UK many years, as I lived in Switzerland and other countries. But when I joined this project, I joined because I know it does create value, real value for people. And they rely on their work, daily work for us. So that responsibility is quite as heavy as important and noble. So I think, and I won't go into corporate social responsibility and those obligations because they do exist, and not only because we have the financing arrangement in the other side of the world, but also because we have a commitment locally with the establishment here. And if I go further, our commitment is regional. We need to understand the African context, bearing in mind the African Union and the agreements in place for a regional economy, and we are part of it. That's a different type of responsibility that we have taken in our shoulders. So there are various sides of this, and to be able to carry on and look at the business, and by saying the business, I mean how do we make money? Because we're not an NGO, we're not a charitable institution. These are serious players that have put themselves in a consortium to make money. But at the same time, in this context, you cannot make money if you don't give away what is needed. So, you know, it's a really, you really need to have a balanced company business plan, so to speak. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And maybe some could take a good view at what we do in that sense, which is, well, actually, maybe in some more developed economies, they should go back to really looking at what people need and build their business around it, rather than looking at the finance Excel sheets only. Although, as I said, this is obviously tremendously important, even for us. But we do have a balanced approach, because we know that we are established in a community that is fast evolving. I'm going to give you an example. Because of the importance in terms of job creation that this project has, I am pretty sure that if I'm still around in 10 years, some of the people that work here today will see their kids joining the company. This is how important it is from an emotional, humanized point of view. You know, there's a tradition in this geographical context that people will join the company their parents work for. Also because there's not a lot more, except if this example sets the tone for others and it's multiplied. And then we become flagship projects. And that's also in our to-do list, to become really something that has created value.
Perfect. Jason, how do business create value? How can they create value?
Yeah, absolutely. I loved what you said. And this is maybe like a very limited, skewed view of what a business is, but to me, a business is, it's of course a lot of things, and I like the heterogeneous set question. Sort of like, but the purpose of a business is to get customers and keep them, and have those customers pay them. And to Nuno's point, it's in order to, I mean, you could just be selfish and just be a scam artist, and it's just you, right? But if you want to have 1,000 people that work for you, you have to give away value, and you have to pay, spend money to make money, as the old saying goes. And if you're not a good actor and you don't lead with integrity, and I think we can all tell just in the short time that we've all been together that it's no surprise that your company is succeeding that way. It's really, really critical that so businesses drive value by making and satisfying customers. And in order to do so, people trade their time, talents, and efforts into and receive money in return. And the regulatory environments, we're seeing this right now play out in the United States and in Europe, whether on data, AI policy, on digital assets and cryptocurrencies, market structure legislation or regulation. GDPR goes beyond Europe, right? The United States market structure bills, we're going to go beyond our borders, right? We're eviscerating from an economic perspective of borders in a lot of these cases. And so businesses are going to drive not just local or national value, but global value. And so, we're seeing it with, how people are hiring. where jobs are going, what countries are investing in what space. So it's incumbent upon a business, right, in order to create value, to have a set of ethics. One of the things we talk about being a mission-driven, mission, vision, and values-driven company. And that can't be made up. It has to be authentic. It has to pass the stress test. And unfortunately, I think sometimes it doesn't work that way, but that's again why we have regulation. So again, business drives value by creating customers and getting people excited in a mutual shared vision. And it's incumbent upon policymakers to create a good regulatory environment to protect consumers, but also to have an innovator's presumption and allow for those businesses to drive that growth, because government does not drive growth. And we've seen that for the last 3/4 of a half a century or so, but government does not create growth. Businesses do, and people do.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions from the audience there? Camden?
We do have a question. I think, yeah, you might have to physically come up to one of the, I think just like anywhere in the front row area.
You were along here or?
Yeah, I think if you just kind of.
Greetings. Thank you so much for your excellent input and views. I'm Roderick Lewis. I hope not problematic question. As part of your responses, there are 3 of the speakers that I'm not clear as to where geographically you're located at. So if in the response to my question, once I get to it, if Leisha and Patricia and Alan could please just briefly say where you're located. My question is, in relation to the social compact between government, businesses, and society, what role ideally should the news media play in a nation state? And should there be a requirement or an objective to have a neutral news media body as much as is reasonably feasible in order to, as an objective, reduce the less desirable effect of news media bias for a particular corporate objective, for example? The British Broadcasting Corporation comes to mind as a neutral, potentially viewed as aimed to be as neutral as feasible. And if I'm don't draw the wrath or the impatience of the panel members, okay, poor quality voice, poor quality mode. The second question, if I have your patience to provide your views, is when nation states belong to large organizations such as NATO, 32 member countries, should there be democratic mandate of the nation state member countries provided before NATO embarks upon expansion activities in other parts of the world? Quite lengthy. If any part of my question needs to be restated because I wasn't being heard, please let me know. Thank you again.
Would you like
Hello.
to start with saying where I am, and Lesia, maybe you want to start actually?
Yes, I will start. I am in Lisbon, sunny Lisbon, in Portugal, Europe. Patricia?
Yeah, I'm in London, but my business is in Brussels. Well, also in London, but the office is in Brussels.
I'm in North Carolina, but the scene behind me is outside Medellin, Colombia, which was home to a thriving business that had mission, vision, and lots of customers who thought the Medellin cartel added value and employed a lot of people, lots of jobs. But Jason would say, but you were illegal in some circles.
So does someone would like to answer the question of our audience member?
Should I answer the first question as far as I can answer it? So you were saying, what is the role that media should play? And I think under the rule of law, media should be separate, should be independent from government. And I think in Europe, this is something that's widely discussed now, that not in every country the media is as separate from government anymore, as neutral as it could be. The European Commission has issued a big study to investigate it. And I think even the neutral media bodies might be under fire sometimes in terms of, how neutral are you, where are your sources? But I think that you're right, that obviously we should have neutral media outlet as possible. At least in Europe, I think in almost every country there's one kind of BBC, let's say, or per country, where there's no political tendency to the right or the left or wherever. So I don't know if that answers your question enough.
Jason, would you like to,
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd throw out, again, to my earlier point about, that a corporation has oftentimes it can distort things. There's been a couple points to social media, right? Instagram or Meta or Twitter or whatever it might be. The 24-hour news cycle didn't exist 30 years ago. And I would argue that there's probably no more, especially at least in America, probably no more destabilizing force in American society than our media. It is not a bias issue. It's just, if it bleeds, it leads. We are constantly bombarded with what makes us different, what makes us scared, it's constantly going to those things that don't pull us together. It uses fear, it uses coercion, and I think it's an incredibly destabilized. So I think it's an excellent question. Whoever asked that, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's really, really important for democracies or republics, as we are in America, to have a good understanding. And so coincidentally, right now there's a debate in Washington about whether we're going to continue to fund the public broadcasting service and National Public Radio and National Public Media. We've already closed Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, and just in this last couple of weeks, and so it's a debate that is ongoing. I tend to not ever trust a state media source just because it's like, they clearly have an objective. This is a foreign policy. Like, I don't trust RT, right? So like, why would I trust, something else? So I think that it's important that people look at the incentives of that news organization. Fox News wants conservatives, MSNBC wants, liberals. What does BBC want, or what does RT want? I think it's important, or CBC want, right? I think it's really, really important for you to think about the incentives, and as you're filtering and understanding the information that you're seeing. I think that's really, really important. And I think, personally, I don't think state media has a place in the modern economy, or in the modern space, simply just because, again, why do governments need media networks at this point? And we have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have other tools, that there are more checks and balances, and we have choice. Again, it's so important to talk about choice. As consumers and as citizens, we should have a choice on what we listen to. We shouldn't listen to our government tell us what's the truth and what isn't. So that's what I would say the role of the media.
All right,
Just to
so I
jump
think
in there, just sorry, just to add on to that, I think I really agree with that, and I think the danger we're in now is maybe not per se the media bodies, although there are issues, but more with the platforms and the way we're being fed in such a way that we're being polarized, and we're not even able to see other people's opinions in our feeds, for example. And this is so important also us to get coming together here. We're fairly agreed, but I think this is one of the things we should do more. Come together, talk, rather than, and obviously think critically, like you say, Jason, do our own research, but we have to be able to learn and talk about differing views, and otherwise we'll become a completely polarized society, which we seem to be becoming already.
Thank you so much for that, Patricia. I totally agree. And I think this was an opportunity to do that, just that, to bring together different people with different views to talk and to have a nice conversation. I would just like, since our time is up, I would like to wrap up with a few practical steps that I think our panelists suggested when it comes to the role of businesses in society and how they can add value. They can do it through job creation, by developing diplomatic ties, by taking into account community needs, by taking into account stakeholders' needs, such as customers' needs, and to have a set of ethics that is authentic and that solidifies the trust that citizens and their customers and clients and stakeholders in general have or expect to have. Thank you so much for attending. This was amazing. I hope that we can do this more often, like Patricia said. And thank you, Camden and the Center for Business Law, for hosting us, and and the audience for being there. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really great.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Nice to
Bye.
meet you.
We're all clapping in the room if you can't hear.